I still remember the exact moment when my marriage shattered beyond repair, the tinkling of champagne glasses suddenly going silent, the feeling of all eyes in the ballroom turning toward me, the sound of my wife's voice, clear and deliberate, as she announced to her entire family that I was basically broke and that she was tired of pretending we had money. All this at her sister's lavish wedding, the ultimate stage for public humiliation. The Blackwood family's idea of a simple wedding involved renting out the entire Grand Meridian Hotel, a 5-star landmark overlooking the Pacific. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Crystal. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables, adorned with arrangements of imported flowers, while a string quartet played softly in the background. It was exactly the kind of extravagant display of wealth that had always made me uncomfortable, but I'd learned to smile through these events for Sophia's sake. My wife of 3 years looked stunning that evening, dressed in a designer gown that had cost more than my first car. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly, diamond earrings, a gift from her father, catching the light when she moved. To anyone watching, we looked like the perfect couple, successful, happy, part of the Blackwood inner circle. Only Sophia knew the truth, or at least her version of it. I stood near the bar, nursing a glass of scotch, exchanging pleasantries with Sophia's cousins about golf courses I'd never played and vacation spots I'd never visited. This was the drill at every Blackwood gathering: maintain the facade, play the role of the successful husband who had married into one of the most prestigious families on the West Coast. Daniel. Sophia appeared at my elbow, her smile tight, voice pitched slightly higher than normal. Mum's looking for us. Something about a family photo before Jennifer throws the bouquet. I nodded, excused myself from the conversation, and followed my wife across the ballroom. Her back was rigid, shoulders tense despite her outward smile. Something was wrong. Everything okay? I asked quietly as we weaved through clusters of guests. She didn't look at me. We'll talk later. But later never came. Instead, what happened next would permanently alter the course of our lives. We joined the Blackwood family near the elaborate wedding cake, a 7-tiered masterpiece that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Edward Blackwood, Sophia's father, was holding court, tumbler of bourbon in hand, regaling his inner circle with stories about his latest business acquisition. "Ah, there they are!" Edward boomed when he spotted us. "Daniel, just the man I wanted to see. Tell Harrison about that investment opportunity you mentioned last month, the tech startup." Before I could respond, Sophia let out a laugh, sharp, almost brittle. "Dad, please, Daniel isn't exactly a financial expert." A moment of awkward silence followed. Edward's bushy eyebrows drew together in confusion. "What do you mean? I thought your firm was backing that AI company. What was it called?" "Neuralink," I supplied, increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of this conversation. "Daniel doesn't work there anymore," Sophia announced, loud enough that nearby conversations quieted. She took a deep sip of champagne, a flush creeping up her neck. "He resigned 2 months ago." This was technically true. I had left Westridge Capital, but not for the reasons her tone implied. "Taking some time between opportunities," I said smoothly, trying to salvage the situation. "The right fit is important." Sophia's laugh again, higher this time. "The right fit, that's one way to put it." Edward was watching us carefully now, his jovial demeanor fading. "Everything all right, you two?" "Perfectly fine," I assured him, placing my hand gently on Sophia's back. She stiffened at my touch. "No, Dad, everything is not fine," Sophia said, stepping away from me. "I'm tired of pretending." The string quartet had finished their piece, creating a momentary lull in the ambient. Noise. Sophia's voice carried farther than she perhaps intended, or exactly as far as she intended. "Daniel isn't between opportunities. He's broke." She emphasized the last word, her voice dripping with disdain. He's been pretending to go to work for weeks, but the truth is he has nothing. No job, no prospects, no plan. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen, aware of dozens of eyes on me, the weight of judgment almost physical. This was not just a marital disagreement, this was a public execution of my reputation. "Sophia," I said quietly, "this isn't the place." "When is the place? Daniel?" Her voice rose, emboldened by alcohol and what I now recognized as weeks of built-up resentment. "When were you going to tell my family that we can barely make rent? That all your big talk about business ventures was just that? Talk?" Jennifer, the bride, placed a hand on her sister's arm. "Soph, maybe you should—" "No," Sophia shook her off. "Everyone needs to know what he's really like. Do you know he asked me to sell my jewelry last week? My grandmother's pearls. This was a distortion so severe it bordered on fiction. I had suggested we both make sacrifices. During this transition period, Sophia had immediately assumed I meant her family heirlooms, launching an argument that had simmered for days. "That's not what happened," I said, keeping my voice level despite the humiliation burning through me. "You know that's not true." Edward Blackwood cleared his throat, discomfort evident in his usually confident demeanor. "Perhaps this discussion should happen in private." "Why?" Sophia demanded, turning to address the wider circle that had gathered, drawn by the spectacle. "So we can keep pretending that Daniel is a success, that he belongs here." She gestured widely, champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. "He's been lying to all of you. To me. He's not the man I married." The cruelty of her words, the public nature of this betrayal, left me speechless. We had problems, certainly. What couple didn't? But this calculated humiliation was something else entirely. It spoke to a fundamental lack of respect, of loyalty. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over, not because of financial struggles, but because the woman I had loved for years had just revealed she had no faith in me at all. "I think I should go," I said quietly. "Yes, you should," Sophia agreed, her expression cold. "And take your empty promises with you." As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the various expressions around me: pity, embarrassment, and from some of Sophia's male relatives, poorly disguised satisfaction. I had always been an outsider to them, the scholarship kid who had somehow infiltrated their ranks by marrying one of their own. Now I was being rightfully expelled. The walk across that ballroom was the longest of my life. Each step felt like moving through molasses, the weight of failure and betrayal pressing down on me. Not once did I look back. Not once did I hear Sophia call my name. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face like a slap, bringing with it a strange sense of clarity. I loosened my tie, taking deep breaths as I waited for the valet to bring my car, a sensible Audi that had been my one concession to maintaining appearances in Sophia's world. "Mr. Reeves," the valet appeared, holding out my keys, his expression carefully neutral. Word traveled fast, even to the hotel staff. "Thank you," I said, pressing a tip into his hand that was probably more generous than my current situation warranted. Some habits die hard. As I slid into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed with a text. Not from Sophia, as some small, foolish part of me hoped, but from Alan Chen, my former colleague at Westridge, and now my business partner in the venture Sophia knew nothing about. "Initial tests successful. Investors want to meet Monday." "This is happening, Daniel." I stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping me. The irony was almost too perfect. Here was confirmation that everything we'd been working toward, the reason I'd left Westridge, the secret project that had consumed my days and nights, was finally coming to fruition. And it had arrived precisely when my wife had publicly declared me a failure. I started the car and pulled away from the Grand Meridian, leaving behind the glittering facade of the Blackwood world. In the rear-view mirror, the hotel lights receded, becoming just another constellation in the city skyline. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What Sophia had told her family tonight wasn't entirely untrue. I had left my lucrative position at Westridge Capital. We were living on savings. I hadn't brought in an actual paycheck in 2 months. But what she didn't know, what I had been explicitly keeping from her and the notoriously loose-lipped Blackwood family, was why. Neural Sync wasn't just another tech startup. It was revolutionary, a breakthrough in quantum computing that Alan and I had developed after hours, away from Westridge's corporate structure and proprietary claims. When we realized what we had, we both resigned, recruited a small team sworn to secrecy, and poured every resource we had into developing a working prototype before seeking external funding. It was the biggest risk of my career, with potentially the biggest reward. But I had kept Sophia in the dark, partly for necessary confidentiality, and partly because I had begun to recognize an uncomfortable truth. My wife had married the prestige of my former position, not the man himself. As I drove through the night, toward the small apartment that served as both our temporary home and my unofficial office, I realized that perhaps tonight's public humiliation was a blessing in disguise. It had torn away the pretense, exposed the fundamental fracture in our relationship that no amount of success, future or present, could repair. She looked away, jaw tight. That was supposed to be charming, the self-made man, but it's less charming when you throw it all away on some tech fantasy. It's not a fantasy, Sophia. Neural Sync is real. Tonight, while you were busy destroying my reputation, we received confirmation that our initial tests were successful. Investors want to meet on Monday. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? Would it have stopped you from announcing to your entire family that I'm a failure? She had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but it passed quickly. You should have taken Dad's offer. It was guaranteed. Safe. I didn't marry you to work for your father. I didn't build my career to play it safe. Sophia sank into an armchair, suddenly looking exhausted. What happens now? It was a good question, one I had been pondering since leaving the wedding. In the clarity that comes with betrayal, I saw our marriage for what it had become. A transaction. She had wanted the status of being married to a successful businessman. I had wanted, what? The illusion of belonging to her world. The validation of being accepted by a family like the Blackwoods. Whatever it was, it no longer existed. I think we both know, I said quietly. She looked up, a flash of something, panic, regret, crossing her features. Are you leaving me? The question hung between us, weighted with 3 years of shared history, with moments of genuine connection now overshadowed by tonight's humiliation. No, Sophia, you left me tonight, in front of everyone who matters to you. You made your choice. She stood abruptly. So that's it. One bad night and you're throwing away our marriage. This wasn't just one bad night. This was you showing me exactly what you think of me, what you value. I moved toward the door, no longer able to stand being in the same room with her. I'll sleep in the guest room. Tomorrow I'll pack my things. Where will you go? She asked, and I couldn't tell if it was concern or calculation in her voice. Does it matter to you? She didn't answer directly. The apartment is in my name. Of course, that would be her concern. Assets, ownership, what belonged to whom. The Blackwood mentality of cataloguing possessions was deeply ingrained. Keep it, I said simply. Keep everything. I walked out, closing the door on her stunned expression. In the spare bedroom that had become my makeshift office, I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond words. On the desk sat the prototype that had consumed my life for months. A quantum computing processor that could revolutionize artificial intelligence, make neural sync the most valuable tech startup of the decade. Sophia had no idea. She had seen only what was missing, the trappings of wealth, the security of established success, not what was being built. In the morning, I woke before dawn, packed 2 suitcases with essential clothing and personal items, and gathered the critical files and equipment I would need. I left my wedding ring on the dresser, alongside a note with my lawyer's contact information. There was nothing else to say. As I loaded my car, the city was just beginning to stir, the early morning light giving everything a surreal quality. 3 years of marriage ended in a single night. Yet strangely, I felt no urge to go back, to try to salvage what we had built together. The foundation had been revealed as fundamentally flawed. I was about to get into my car when I heard the building's front door open. Sophia stood there in her silk robe, hair disheveled, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. "So you're really going," she said, her voice hoarse. I nodded. "It's for the best." She wrapped her arms around herself, the morning chill. Or perhaps something else, making her shiver. What am I supposed to tell people? Even now, her concern was appearances. What the Blackwoods and their social circle would think, how she would explain the sudden absence of her husband. "Tell them whatever you want, Sophia. Tell them I failed. Tell them you had to cut your losses." I got into the car, rolled down the window for one final thought. "Just remember, you made this choice." "This isn't what I wanted," she said, a hint of the woman I had fallen in love with finally breaking through the Blackwood veneer. "Yes, it is. You wanted a husband who would fit neatly into your family's world. That was never going to be me." She took a step forward. "Where will you go?" I started the engine. Forward. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of her in the rear-view mirror, standing alone in the soft morning light. For a brief moment I felt a pang of what might have been if she had believed in me, if she had seen beyond the temporary setback to the bigger vision. But that woman existed only in my imagination. The real Sophia had shown her true self at her sister's wedding in front of everyone who mattered to her. She had chosen her family's approval over loyalty to her husband. I drove to the only place I could go, the small warehouse space that housed Neural Sync's operations. Alan was already there, surrounded by monitors and equipment, his rumpled clothes suggesting he'd worked through the night. He looked up as I entered, immediately noticing the suitcases. "That bad, huh?" "Worse," I said, setting down my bags. "Sophia announced to her entire family that I'm broke and unemployed. At her sister's wedding." Alan winced. "Jesus, what are you going to do?" I looked around at the modest space, industrial concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, folding tables serving as workstations. It was nothing like the gleaming Westridge offices or the Blackwood estate, but it was where the future was being built. "I'm going to work," I said simply. "We have investors to meet on Monday." Alan studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You can crash at my place until you figure things out." "Thanks." I glanced at the prototype on the central workbench, our quantum processor, deceptively small for something with such potential. "But first, show me what happened last night. You said the tests were successful?" As Alan pulled up the test results. On the main screen, explaining breakthrough after breakthrough, I felt the weight of the past 24 hours begin to lift. Sophia and the Blackwoods had defined me by what I lacked, by a temporary financial situation. They had no idea what was coming. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, unanswered calls from Sophia, and 18-hour workdays at the Neural Sync warehouse. I crashed on Alan's couch, living out of suitcases, existing on coffee and takeout. The divorce proceedings hung over everything like a dark cloud, but I channeled all my energy into the company. Work became both escape and purpose. Our Monday meeting with potential investors had gone well, surprisingly well, but securing the funding we needed would still take time. Time we didn't have much of, as our personal resources were quickly depleting. "You look like hell," Alan commented one morning, dropping a coffee on my makeshift desk. "When's the last time you slept?" "Actually slept, not passed out over your keyboard." I rubbed my eyes, trying to remember. "Tuesday, maybe?" "It's Friday, Daniel." I shrugged and took the coffee. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Nobody going through a divorce while trying to launch a tech startup is fine." He sat on the edge of the desk. "Have you talked to Sophia?" "No point." I took a long sip, the scalding liquid helping to clear my mind. "Her lawyer's handling everything." "And the Blackwoods?" I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "Edward called, once, to tell me how disappointed he was in my lack of responsibility, and to offer to buy out whatever little project I was working on so I could take a proper position at Blackwood Industries." Alan whistled low. "That takes some nerve. That's the Blackwood way." I turned back to my screen, where lines of code blurred together after hours of continuous work. "They think everything and everyone has a price." "Speaking of price," Alan said, his tone growing serious, "we need to talk about the burn rate. At this pace, we'll be out of operating capital in 3 weeks. This wasn't news. I'd been monitoring our finances obsessively, but hearing it spoken aloud made it more real, more pressing. The next day, I found myself walking into the towering glass headquarters of Blackwood Industries, dressed in my best, remaining suit. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mr. Reeves, we weren't expecting you." Her surprise confirmed what I had suspected. Edward's assistant had never put me on the calendar. He had been that confident I would reject the meeting. "I'd like to see Mr. Blackwood if he's available." She made a quick call, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "He'll see you right away. 15th floor, you remember the way?" Edward's corner office was exactly as I remembered it. Imposing, meticulously designed to intimidate visitors while showcasing the Blackwood empire. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city. Expensive art adorned the walls, and a massive desk of polished mahogany dominated the space. Edward Blackwood stood as I entered, surprise briefly flickering across his features before his businessman's mask slipped back into place. "Daniel, this is unexpected." "I received your offer," I said, remaining standing though he gestured to a chair. "And? Have you come to your senses?" The condescension in his tone only reinforced my decision. "I have a counteroffer." I placed a folder on his desk. "Neural Sync needs investment. 8 million for 20% of the company." Edward's eyebrows shot up, then he laughed, a genuine belly-deep laugh. "You can't be serious. Our quantum processing technology will revolutionize artificial intelligence applications. The prototype works. We have simulation data to prove it." I met his gaze steadily. "This isn't a charity request, Edward. It's a business opportunity." He picked up the folder, flipped through it with practiced casualness. "And if I say no, then I walk away with my company intact and find the investment elsewhere. Your settlement offer made one thing abundantly clear. You're worried about something. Maybe it's just your family's reputation, or maybe you've heard whispers about what we're building at Neural Sync." His expression hardened almost imperceptibly, a tell I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't spent 3 years studying the man across dinner tables and at family gatherings. "You're overplaying your hand, Daniel. 2 million is my final offer." I smiled, feeling strangely calm. "No, it's not, because this isn't about money for you, Edward. It's about control. You need to win, to put me in my place. That's why you sent the car yesterday, why you assumed I'd accept your summons." Edward's jaw tightened. "You should be careful about making enemies of people like me." "I'm not making an enemy. I'm making a business proposition. Invest in neural sync at fair market value, or watch us succeed without you. Either way, I'm not taking your settlement. I turned to leave, had almost reached the door when his voice stopped me. 4 million for 25%, and you agree to keep the divorce proceedings quiet. I paused, not turning back. 8 million for 20% non-voting shares. I'll sign an NDA about the marriage, but Neural Sync's achievements will be public. Take it or leave it, Edward. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. I'll have my team review your materials, he said finally. No promises. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. More importantly, the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the desperate son-in-law begging for approval. I was a businessman making a deal. You have 24 hours, I said, and walked out without looking back. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had drained me, but beneath the fatigue was something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Whether Edward invested or not, I had found my footing again. The Blackwoods hadn't broken me. They had merely shown me what I was truly made of. Edward Blackwood never called. The 24 hours passed, then 48, then a week. I hadn't really expected him to invest. Pride wouldn't allow it, but some small part of me had hoped that business sense might override his ego. It didn't. Instead, something worse happened. 10 days after my meeting with Edward, I arrived at the warehouse to find Alan pacing frantically, his face ashen. "We've been hacked," he said without preamble. "Someone got into our servers overnight. The security logs show a systematic attack, targeting our proprietary algorithms specifically." My blood ran cold. "How bad?" "They copied everything, our quantum processing framework, the neural network architecture, all of it." Alan ran a hand through his hair. "And that's not all. Every investor we've been talking to suddenly went dark this morning, all on the same day, like someone made calls." I didn't need to ask who that someone might be. Edward Blackwood had connections throughout the tech investment world. "He's trying to bury us," I said, the realization like ice in my veins. "It gets worse." Alan's voice dropped. "He's not just burying us, he's stealing from us. Look." He turned his laptop toward me, showing a press release from Blackwood Technologies, a subsidiary I hadn't even known existed. The headline made my stomach drop. "Blackwood Technologies announces breakthrough in quantum computing." The accompanying article detailed a revolutionary approach to quantum processing for AI applications, language eerily similar to our own pitch deck. They were rushing to market with our technology, betting that their resources and reputation would let them beat us to the finish line. "Can they do this?" Alan asked, the question barely above a whisper. "Legally?" It was complicated. We had patents pending, but patent fights were lengthy, expensive battles that startups rarely won against conglomerates. Practically, Edward Blackwood had just declared war, and he had billions in ammunition. "Call everyone in," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We need to move fast." The next 48 hours were the most intense of my professional life. Our small team worked around the clock, implementing emergency protocols, changing security frameworks, and accelerating development timelines. On the third day, the first lawsuit hit, Blackwood Technologies claiming we had stolen intellectual property from them. It was outrageous, a complete inversion of reality, but the legal filing achieved its purpose, creating a cloud of doubt around Neural Sync just when we needed credibility most. By the end of the week, our last potential investor had pulled out. Our bank accounts were dwindling rapidly. The team was exhausted, demoralized. "We should talk options," Alan said quietly, late one night when everyone else had finally gone home. "Realistic ones." I stared at the quantum processor prototype sitting on the workbench, our creation, our future, now threatened by Edward Blackwood's vindictiveness. "There's only one option," I said. "We fight." Alan sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. "With what, Daniel? We're weeks away from insolvency. The lawsuit will drag on for years. Edward has unlimited resources. He was right, of course. By conventional metrics, we were finished. But something in me refused to accept defeat. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a text message from an unknown number. Still have. That counteroffer, no signature, no explanation. But I knew who it was from, Jason Blackwood, Edward's younger brother, and the family's black sheep. I had met him only twice during my marriage to Sophia, both times at events where his presence had clearly irritated Edward. I stared at the message for a long moment. Jason had been pushed out of Blackwood Industries a decade ago, allegedly for reckless business decisions, but more likely because he refused to bend to Edward's authority. He had gone on to build his own fortune in international markets, deliberately, staying out of industries where he might compete with his brother. Was this a trap? Another Blackwood manipulation? I typed back, "Depends who's asking." The response came immediately. "Someone who enjoys watching Edward squirm. Dinner tonight. The Stanley, 8 p.m. The Stanley was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Impossible to get reservations on short notice, unless you were someone like Jason Blackwood. I hesitated only briefly before responding. "I'll be there." I told Alan where I was going, but swore him to secrecy. If this was legitimate, it could be our lifeline. If it was a trap, better that only I walked into it. The Stanley lived up to its reputation. Understated elegance, discreet service, and a clientele that wielded influence more comfortably than they flashed wealth. I was led to a private dining room where Jason Blackwood sat alone, nursing a whiskey. At 62, he was a decade older than Edward, but looked younger, leaner, with fewer worry lines etched into his face, and a casual confidence his brother's rigid posture never achieved. "Daniel Reeves," he stood, extending his hand. "About time we properly met." His handshake was firm, his gaze direct, assessing but not judgmental. "Mr. Blackwood, Jason, please. I've had enough formality from that family to last several lifetimes." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Drink." "Scotch." "Neat," he signaled to the server, then leaned back, studying me openly. "So you're the man who not only walked away from the Blackwood fortune, but is now giving my brother ulcers. I like you already." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. I didn't set out to give anyone ulcers. The best revenge never does. Jason raised his glass slightly. "It just happens naturally when you refuse to play by their rules." Once we were alone again, Jason's expression turned serious. "I'll be direct. I know what Edward did to your company. It's his standard playbook. Crush, copy, discredit. He's done it a dozen times." I took a careful sip of scotch. "And you're telling me this because I've spent 20 years watching my brother destroy things he can't control?" Jason leaned forward slightly. "And because your quantum processing technology is exactly what one of my companies needs." There it was, the potential lifeline we'd been searching for. "How did you even hear about our technology?" "We've been operating under the radar. Edward's lawsuit made me curious. My brother doesn't waste legal resources on threats he doesn't fear." Jason's smile was knowing. "So I had my team do some digging. What they found impressed me enough to arrange this meeting." Jason outlined what he was proposing. 12 million for 25% of neural sync, plus resources to fight Edward's lawsuit and connections to clients beyond Blackwood's influence. It was more than generous. It was salvation. "Why?" I asked finally. "Why help us? Is this just about annoying your brother?" Jason set down his fork, his expression turning contemplative. "Partly, I won't deny that, but mostly because I recognize potential when I see it. Your technology could transform entire industries. I'd rather be part of that transformation than watch Edward strangle it in its crib." "What's the catch?" "Smart man." Jason nodded approvingly. "The catch is that I want exclusive rights to applications in energy infrastructure for 5 years. The rest of the market is yours, but that sector belongs to my companies initially. Energy wasn't our primary target market anyway. The limitation was significant but not crippling. I'll need to discuss it with my partner. Of course, but don't take too long. Edward knows I'm back in town. Once he figures out why, he'll move to block this any way he can. As we parted outside the restaurant, Jason offered one final piece of advice. Whatever you decide, watch your back. Edward doesn't lose gracefully. Never has. The next 6 months were a blur of 18-hour workdays, legal battles, and the gradual transformation of Neural Sync from struggling startup to legitimate contender. Jason Blackwood proved to be more than just an investor. He was a mentor, a shield against Edward's attacks, and a connector to clients beyond the Blackwood sphere of influence. Our new facility on the west side of the city became a fortress of innovation. The warehouse looked unassuming from the outside, deliberately so. But inside housed state-of-the-art equipment, enhanced security systems, and a team that had grown from 14 to 32. The lawsuit from Blackwood Technologies dragged on, but with Jason's resources backing us, we could match their legal maneuvers, step for step. More importantly, we were outpacing them technologically. While Edward's team struggled to understand the stolen code, we had already moved 2 generations beyond it. I had moved into a modest apartment near our facility, finally giving Alan back his couch. My personal life remained non-existent. Divorce, proceedings, work, occasional meals with the team, sleep when absolutely necessary. I hadn't spoken to Sophia since that night at her sister's wedding, communicating only through attorneys. Then came the breakthrough. It was a Tuesday evening. Most of the team had gone home, but I remained in the lab with Maya Chen, our lead quantum physicist. We'd been working on optimizing the processor's coherence time, the crucial period during which quantum bits maintained their state before degrading into classical bits. Try routing through the secondary cooling chamber, I suggested, pointing to the schematic on her screen. If we can reduce the thermal interference. Maya made the adjustment, ran the simulation, and we both watched as the numbers appeared. Coherence, extended by 47%. That can't be right, she muttered, running the simulation again. The results were identical. Run it once more with a different data set, I said, trying to contain my excitement. The third test confirmed it. We had just solved one of the fundamental limitations of quantum computing, the fragility of quantum states in real-world conditions. This wasn't an incremental improvement. It was a paradigm shift. I called an emergency team meeting for the next morning. As I drove home that night, my phone rang. Unknown number, Daniel Reeves. Mr. Reeves, this is Thomas Wilson from Bloomberg Technology. We're running a feature on emerging quantum computing companies. Would you be willing to comment? I nearly swerved off the road. Bloomberg? How had they even heard of us? I'd need more information before agreeing to an interview, I said cautiously. We're particularly interested in rumors about a breakthrough in quantum coherent stability. Sources suggest Neural Sync has achieved something remarkable. My blood ran cold. We had only confirmed the breakthrough hours ago. The only people who knew were Maya and myself. I'm afraid I can't comment on that, I said, mind racing. How had this leaked? You understand the competitive nature of our industry. I negotiated a compromise. I would meet with Wilson the following week after we had secured provisional patents on our new approach. The moment I hung up, I called Jason Blackwood. We may have a security problem, I said without preamble. Someone leaked information about a breakthrough we just confirmed today. Jason was silent for a moment. I've been expecting this. Edward wouldn't rely solely on legal channels to attack. You think he has someone inside Neural Sync? It's his standard approach. Plant an insider, gather intelligence, undermine from within. The thought that someone on our team might be betraying us made me physically ill. What do we do? I asked. Nothing obvious, Jason advised. No witch hunts, No accusations. That's what he wants, to create paranoia, division. Instead, we control the narrative, make a formal announcement about your breakthrough before Bloomberg runs their story. Frame it your way. It was good advice. The next morning, after briefing the core team on both the breakthrough and the potential security concern, we drafted a press release announcing Neuralsync's revolutionary advancement in quantum coherent stability. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Tech blogs picked up the story first, followed by industry publications, then mainstream business media. Within 24 hours, Neuralsync had transformed from obscure startup to industry sensation. My phone did not stop ringing. Investors, potential clients, technology partners, reporters, even Gabriel Martinez, the famously reclusive founder of Helios Aerospace, called personally to discuss potential applications. In the midst of this whirlwind, a text arrived from an unexpected source. "Congratulations. I knew you would succeed. I've always believed in you. Can we talk?" Sophia. After months of silence, she was reaching out now that success was public, now that the narrative had changed from Daniel Reeves' failure to Daniel Reeves. Visionary. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. The Bloomberg article ran the following week, featuring an extensive interview with me and profiles of key team members. The headline said it all. "The quantum revolution has arrived, how Neuralsync is changing computing forever." 2 days later, Blackwood Technologies quietly announced they were refocusing their quantum computing division on other priorities. Corporate speak for abandoning a losing battle. Edward Blackwood had realized he couldn't win with stolen technology that was already obsolete. That evening, as I was about to leave the office, Alan appeared in my doorway, tablet in hand. "You're going to want to see this," he said, passing me the device. It was a financial news article about the Blackwood Industries quarterly earnings call. Buried in the dense text was a single sentence that made my heart race. Blackwood Technologies reported a $42 million write-down related to discontinued quantum computing projects. $42 million. Edward Blackwood had wasted $42 million trying to steal and replicate our technology, only to abandon it when we leapfrogged ahead. "We won," Alan said simply. Had we? The victory felt hollow somehow. We had survived Edward's attacks, yes. We had achieved a technological breakthrough, yes. But I had lost my marriage, months of my life, and some fundamental innocence about how the world worked. Yet, as I looked around at the facility we had built, at the team we had assembled, at the impossible technology we had created, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't about proving the Blackwoods wrong. It was about what came next. "We haven't won yet," I said, handing the tablet back. "We've just earned the right to keep playing." The spark that had been kindled in those dark days after Sophia's betrayal had grown into something self-sustaining, something that burned with its own purpose beyond revenge or vindication. Neuralsync wasn't just my response to humiliation anymore. It was my future. Success created its own challenges. In the weeks following the Bloomberg article, Neuralsync transformed from scrappy underdog to industry darling. We were flooded with investment offers, partnership proposals, and acquisition inquiries. Major tech companies that wouldn't return my calls 6 months earlier now sent their CEOs to court us personally. After a particularly chaotic week, I called an all-hands meeting. "We're at a crossroads," I told the assembled team. "We have 2 paths forward. We can take outside investment, scale quickly, and risk losing control of our vision. Or we can stay independent, grow more slowly, but build exactly what we believe in." The room was silent, all eyes on me. These people had taken a chance on Neuralsync when it was nothing but potential and risk. "I want to hear from all of you," I continued. This isn't just my company anymore. It's ours. The discussion that followed was passionate and ultimately unified. Despite the allure of immediate growth, the team overwhelmingly favored independence. They had joined NeuralSync not just for career advancement, but because they believed in our approach to quantum computing. That evening, I met with Jason Blackwood to discuss our path forward. We sat on the rooftop terrace of his downtown apartment. The city lights spread below us. "They're talking about you at the Blackwood family dinners," Jason said, sipping his whiskey. "Edward can barely contain his rage. Sophia apparently left the table in tears last Sunday." I should have felt satisfaction at this news. Instead, I felt nothing. The Blackwoods' opinion of me no longer mattered. "We've decided to stay independent," I said, changing the subject. "No additional investment rounds for now, just strategic partnerships to develop practical applications." Jason nodded. "Smart move. Control matters more than capital at this stage." He studied me for a moment. "You know what your next step should be, don't you? Expanding our engineering team. The healthcare applications have potential." "Going public," Jason interrupted. "Not immediately, but start preparing now, 12 to 18 months from today." The suggestion caught me off guard. An IPO hadn't been on my radar. We were still focused on perfecting the technology. "Isn't that premature? We're barely out of R&D. Jason leaned forward. "Listen carefully, Daniel. This isn't just about business anymore. Edward has made it personal. An IPO would accomplish two things: secure NeuralSync's future beyond any individual, and provide the most public possible vindication." He didn't need to elaborate. Going public would mean financial independence for everyone who had believed in NeuralSync. It would mean the Blackwoods watching as the man they had humiliated achieved the kind of success they couldn't ignore. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Do more than think," Jason advised. "Start planning. Hire the right CFO. Clean up your corporate structure. Document everything meticulously. When the time comes, be ready." That night, unable to sleep, I stood at the window of my apartment, watching the distant lights of the city. Jason's suggestion had awakened something in me, not just ambition, but a clarity of purpose. The next morning, I called a meeting with Alan and our core leadership team. "We're going to prepare for an IPO," I announced. "Target date 18 months from now." Their reactions ranged from shock to excitement to apprehension. "That's ambitious," Alan said carefully. "It's necessary," I countered. "Not just for funding, but for stability. We need to secure NeuralSync beyond any individual, including me." Over the following months, we transformed NeuralSync from promising startup to IPO candidate. We hired Vanessa Wright, a respected CFO with multiple successful public offerings on her resume. We formalized our corporate governance, expanded our board beyond Jason and myself, and initiated the meticulous documentation process required for public scrutiny. Alongside these corporate changes, we continued refining our technology. The breakthrough in quantum coherence had opened doors we hadn't even imagined. Our work with Helios Aerospace led to a revolutionary approach to navigation systems. A partnership with Memorial Hospital resulted in quantum-enhanced imaging technology that could detect cellular changes years before conventional methods. These weren't just business successes. They were meaningful applications that would save lives and advance human knowledge. 14 months after our decision to pursue an IPO, Vanessa called me into her office, spreadsheets covering her desk and excitement in her usually composed expression. "The numbers are ready," she said, turning her monitor toward me. "Based on current market conditions and comparable valuations, we're looking at an initial offering in the range of $68 to $72 per share. The figure at the bottom of the screen made me sit down hard. At the midpoint of that range, Neuralink would debut with a market capitalization of $4.2 billion. We've triple-checked everything, Vanessa continued. This isn't hype. It's based on concrete contracts and proven technology. When can we file? I asked, still processing the valuation. S1 is ready for final review. We could file next week, target an offering date in approximately 3 months. 3 months. In just 3 months, Neuralink would become a publicly traded company valued at over $4 billion. And I, the man once declared broke at a society wedding, would become worth nearly $1 billion on paper. The timing would put our IPO almost exactly 2 years after that fateful night, when Sophia had announced to her family that I was a failure. Have you thought about the media strategy? Vanessa asked quietly. They'll want the personal angle, your journey from setback to success. The Blackwood connection will inevitably come up. Was I ready for that level of public examination? For my private pain to become financial news fodder, that evening I called Jason. The filing is ready, I said without preamble. Vanessa's targeting $70 per share. Does the media angle bother you? Jason asked when I raised my concerns. That they'll make it about Sophia? About Edward? It was a simple question that required a complex answer. Did it bother me that the world would know I had been humiliated, rejected, nearly destroyed? No, I realized as I said it. It doesn't, not anymore. Then use it, Jason advised, not with bitterness but with honesty. Your story is compelling precisely because it's real. You were knocked down and got back up. People respond to that. The next day, I authorized Vanessa to proceed with the S1 filing. We would go public in 3 months, and I would embrace the full story, personal and professional, that had brought us to this point. As I signed the final approval documents, I felt a sense of resolution. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about vindication. It was about transformation of a humiliating moment into the catalyst for something extraordinary. Filing the S1 was like firing a starting pistol. The moment the documents became public, everything accelerated. Financial analysts poured over. Our financials, technology journalists dissected our patents. Business reporters began constructing narratives around Neuralink's meteoric rise, and inevitably they discovered the Blackwood connection. Mr. Reeves, could you comment on your relationship with the Blackwood family? Our sources indicate you were previously married to Sophia Blackwood, asked a Wall Street Journal reporter during our first press briefing. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed my response with our PR team. Keep it professional, they advised. Acknowledge, but don't elaborate. Instead, I found myself saying, my personal history with the Blackwoods taught me valuable lessons about resilience and self-belief. Some of life's greatest setbacks can become catalysts for its greatest advances. The reporter looked surprised at my candor. Would you say your divorce was a motivating factor in founding Neuralink? Neuralink exists because we believed quantum computing could be revolutionized. But yes, personal challenges often clarify what matters most. Sometimes you need to lose everything to discover what you're truly capable of building. The quote ran in papers across the country. Rather than dampening investor interest, the personal angle seemed to intensify it. People connected with the narrative of falling down and getting back up, of turning rejection into motivation. Our pre-IPO roadshow, presentations to potential institutional investors, became standing-room-only events. What had been projected as a $70 per share offering was now being whispered at $85 to $90, driven by unprecedented demand. Amidst this frenzy, I received an unexpected email from Jennifer Blackwood, Sophia's sister, whose wedding had been the scene of my public humiliation. Daniel, I've hesitated to reach out, unsure if my message would be welcome. I want to congratulate you on your success with Neuralink. What you've built is truly remarkable. I also want to apologize for what happened at my wedding. I should have intervened, should have stopped Sophia before things went so far. That night has weighed on me. Sophia isn't well. She regrets her actions deeply, though pride prevents her from telling you directly. Our father's influence has always been toxic, but that doesn't excuse what she did. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, just wanted you to know that not everyone in this family applauded your humiliation or celebrated your struggles. Wishing you continued success. Jennifer, I read the email twice, unsure how to feel. Jennifer had never been unkind to me during my marriage to Sophia, but she had never been particularly warm either. Was this genuine remorse or calculated fence-mending? Now that Neural Sync was poised for a multi-billion-dollar IPO and Sophia not well, what did that mean exactly? Despite everything, a small part of me still cared what happened to her. I crafted a brief, polite response. Jennifer, thank you for your message and your congratulations. Neural Sync's success belongs to our entire team, not just me. I appreciate your apology, though none was necessary. That night was painful but ultimately clarifying. Without it, I might never have found the path that led here. I'm sorry to hear Sophia isn't well. Despite our history, I wish her healing and peace. Best regards, Daniel. I hesitated before sending it, wondering if engaging at all was wise. But refusing to acknowledge Jennifer's outreach seemed petty beneath the person I was trying to become. I hit send, then forced myself to refocus on the IPO preparations. The weeks leading up to our public offering were a non-stop whirlwind. Final investor presentations, SEC queries, pricing discussions with our underwriters. I was functioning on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine, but the excitement carried me through. The night before our IPO, the entire Neural Sync team gathered at our headquarters for a private celebration. These were the people who had believed in the vision, who had worked countless late nights and weekends, who had stood firm when Blackwood tried to destroy us. Tomorrow everything changes, I told them, raising a glass of champagne. We'll become a public company with all the scrutiny and pressure that brings. But tonight, I want to thank each of you for making Neural Sync what it is. This success belongs to all of us. The room erupted in applause and cheers. As I looked around at the faces, some who had been with us from the beginning, others who had joined along the way, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. These people had become more than colleagues. They were the family I had chosen, bound together by shared purpose and mutual respect. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Alan found me alone in my office, staring out the window at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Just thinking about how far we've come, from crashed on your couch to—" I gestured vaguely to encompass everything Neural Sync had become. Alan smiled. "Remember when we thought getting through the next month was our biggest challenge? Now it's getting through tomorrow without throwing up on the stock exchange floor." We both laughed, the tension of the upcoming day momentarily broken. "You know," Alan said, his tone turning serious, "in all the craziness, I don't think I've ever properly thanked you." "For what?" "For not giving up. When Blackwood came after us, when we were weeks away from insolvency, when everything seemed impossible, you kept going. You carried us all." I shook my head, uncomfortable with the praise. "We carried each other? Still, tomorrow when that opening bell rings, remember it happened because you refused to stay down when the Blackwoods knocked you flat." His words stayed with me through the sleepless night that followed. By the time my alarm went off at 5 a.m., I had made a decision about how to approach this day. Not with the grim satisfaction of revenge accomplished, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his true path. The morning of our IPO dawned, clear and bright, a perfect spring day in New York. Our team gathered at the stock exchange, everyone dressed in their finest, nervous energy filling the room. Vanessa approached with our lead underwriter, her expression a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Final pricing just came in," she said, her voice hushed. $94 per share. The figure was so far beyond our original projections that it took a moment to process. At $94 per share, NeuralSync would debut with a market cap of nearly $5.5 billion. "Zay, that sustainable?" I asked, concerned about setting expectations too high. The underwriter nodded. "Demand is unprecedented. We could have gone higher, but we want room for positive movement on the first day." As the opening bell approached, we were ushered onto the trading floor. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, traders paused to watch the newest tech darling make its debut. And then, in a moment that felt both surreal and inevitable, I was invited to ring the opening bell. As my hand reached for the button, time seemed to slow. I thought of that night at Jennifer's wedding, of Sophia's cold voice announcing I was basically broke, of the humiliation burning through me as I walked out of that ballroom. I thought of Edward Blackwood's attempt to destroy NeuralSync, of the lawsuit, the hacking, the blacklisting. I thought of sleeping on Alan's couch, of building a company from nothing, of the team that had believed when no one else would. And then I pressed the button, the bell rang, and NeuralSync Technology, Inc. became a public company. The trading screens lit up immediately. 94, 98, 103, 110. By mid-morning, NeuralSync shares were trading at $127, valuing the company at over $7 billion. Financial reporters swarmed, all asking variations of the same question. How did it feel to achieve such spectacular success? "It feels like validation," I told them. "Not just of our technology, but of the belief that innovation and integrity still matter in business. That you can be knocked down and come back stronger than before." One particularly persistent reporter from CNBC pushed further. "Sources close to the Blackwood family suggest your former father-in-law, Edward Blackwood, is furious about today's success." Any response to that? I paused, considering my words carefully. This was the moment when I could twist the knife, could publicly savor Edward's discomfort. It would be so easy, so satisfying. Instead, I smiled slightly. "I wish the Blackwoods..." "Well, my focus is on NeuralSync's future, not on the past." By the end of the trading day, NeuralSync's stock had settled at $140 per share, making it the most successful tech IPO of the year. The company was valued at $8.3 billion, and I, with my 17% ownership stake, was now worth over $1.4 billion on paper. The man Sophia had declared broke at her sister's wedding was now a billionaire. As our team celebrated at a private dinner that evening, I slipped away briefly to the restaurant's terrace. The New York skyline glittered before me, a fitting backdrop to the day's events. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. "Congratulations, Daniel. You proved us all wrong. Edward Blackwood." After everything, he had the audacity to reach out, to position himself as someone who could now acknowledge my success. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that the stock ticker hadn't already said more eloquently. Whatever validation I had once craved from the Blackwoods no longer mattered. I had found something far more valuable, the knowledge that my worth wasn't determined by their approval or by any external measure of success. As I rejoined the celebration, surrounded by the people who had made this journey possible, I felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with humiliation at a wedding had closed with triumph on the stock exchange floor. But even amid the champagne and congratulations, a quiet voice inside reminded me that this was just the beginning. NeuralSync was no longer just my personal redemption story. It was a public company with shareholders, expectations, and responsibilities. The real work was just starting. The weeks following our IPO were a blur of media interviews, investor meetings, and strategic planning sessions. Neuralink stock continued to perform well, settling into a stable trading range that valued the company at just over $9 billion. Industry analysts who had initially been skeptical now praised our technology as transformative and paradigm-shifting. With our newfound resources, we accelerated development of applications that had previously been theoretical. Our partnership with Helios Aerospace expanded to include quantum navigation systems for their next generation of satellites. Memorial Hospital became the test site for our medical imaging technology, with early results showing promise for early cancer detection. These practical applications mattered more to me than the stock price or my paper wealth. They were tangible. Proof that Neuralink was creating actual value, not just financial returns. 3 months after our IPO, at Alan's insistence, I finally took a week off, my first real break in over 2 years. I rented a beach house on a remote stretch of coastline, far from cell service and email. For the first few days, I felt almost physically ill, without work to occupy me, my mind constantly spinning with concerns about the company operating without my oversight. By the 4th day, something shifted. The constant tension I had carried for so long began to ease. I slept for 12 hours straight, waking to the sound of waves rather than alarm clocks or urgent messages. I walked on the beach, read books that had nothing to do with business or technology, and allowed myself to simply exist without constantly proving my worth. On the last evening of my retreat, watching the sunset over the ocean, I realized something profound. I was happy, not because of Neuralink's success or my vindication against the Blackwoods, but because I had found purpose. I had built something meaningful, surrounded myself with people I respected, and rediscovered parts of myself that had been overshadowed by ambition and hurt. When I returned to the office the following Monday, refreshed and clear-headed, Vanessa was waiting with a curious expression. "Good vacation?" she asked. "Surprisingly, yes," I admitted. "What did I miss?" "Something interesting." She handed me a business news magazine, page 34. I flipped to the indicated page and found a small article announcing that Edward Blackwood was stepping down as CEO of Blackwood Industries, effective immediately. The official reason was to pursue other interests, but industry insiders suggested health concerns might be the actual cause. Apparently he had some kind of collapse at a board meeting last week, Vanessa added. Stress-related, according to my sources. I stared at the article, trying to process my reaction. There had been a time when news of Edward's downfall would have brought me satisfaction, even joy. Now I felt only a vague sadness for a man who had sacrificed his health to maintain control and power. "Who's taking over?" I asked. "That's the other interesting part. Not Sophia's brother, as everyone expected. They're bringing in an outside CEO for the first time in Blackwood history." The implications were significant. Edward stepping aside, an outsider taking control. The Blackwood empire was changing fundamentally. "One more thing," Vanessa said, handing me an envelope. "This came for you personally. Courier delivered it this morning." The envelope was heavy cream stationery, expensive and understated. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an elegant letterhead. "Sophia Blackwood. Daniel, I've started this letter 100 times over the past year, never finding the right words. Perhaps there are none. You've built something extraordinary with Neuralink, not just a successful company, but something meaningful, something that matters. I always knew you were capable of greatness, even when I failed to stand by you. My behavior at Jennifer's wedding was unforgivable. There's no excuse, though I've spent 2 years creating them in my mind. The truth is simpler and harder. I betrayed you. I chose family expectations over loyalty to my husband. I valued appearance over Substance. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I simply wanted you to know that I recognize what I lost, not a billionaire, but a man of integrity and vision who deserved better than what I gave him. Wishing you continued success and happiness, Sophia. I read the letter twice, then set it aside. There was a time when these words would have meant everything to me. Validation, vindication, the acknowledgement I had craved in those dark days after the wedding. Now they were just words on paper, sincere perhaps, but arriving far too late to matter in the way they once would have. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I turned to Vanessa with a smile. Let's get to work. The quantum medical imaging trials are showing promising results, and the team needs approval for the next phase. Whatever closure Sophia had sought in writing that letter, my own closure had come not from her acknowledgement, but from the life and purpose I had built without it. 6 months after our IPO, NeuralSync faced its first major crisis as a public company. Our quantum processor, the core of our technology, was showing unexpected degradation in high-volume applications. The issues weren't catastrophic, but they threatened to delay our commercial rollout schedule. We need to disclose this to shareholders, I insisted during an emergency executive meeting, immediately and transparently. Some board members disagreed, arguing for a more measured approach. Let's solve the technical issues first, then communicate from a position of strength, suggested one director. Absolutely not, I countered. That's exactly how tech companies destroy trust. We disclose now, explain our mitigation strategy, and keep everyone updated on progress. The debate lasted hours, but ultimately my position prevailed. The next morning, we issued a press release detailing the technical challenges. As expected, our stock dropped nearly 18% in a single day. Financial reporters who had celebrated our rise now questioned our technology. Competitors seized the opportunity to cast doubt on quantum computing's commercial viability. Even Jason Blackwood called, concerned about the situation. This is the moment that defines you as a public company CEO, he advised. Not the IPO success, but how you handle the first crisis. I threw myself into the technical problem, working alongside our engineering team day and night. Maya Chen, our quantum physicist, identified the issue as a subtle interaction between our cooling system and the quantum state stabilization protocol. The solution isn't complex, she explained, but implementing it requires recalibrating systems already in the field. We're looking at a 3-week delay. Those 3 weeks were among the most intense of my career. I personally called each major client and partner, explaining the situation and our resolution timeline. I held daily briefings for investors, refusing to minimize the challenge while maintaining confidence in our solution. By the end of the 3-week period, we had not only fixed the degradation issue, but improved overall system performance by 8%. Our stock slowly recovered as the market recognized our commitment to transparency. The crisis had an unexpected benefit. It forced us to strengthen our testing protocols and refine our manufacturing processes. What had initially seemed like a setback ultimately made NeuralSync's technology more robust. As we emerged from this challenge, I received an invitation that caught me off guard. The annual Blackwood Foundation Charity Gala. The handwritten note from Jennifer Blackwood, now the foundation's chairperson following her father's retirement, was warm and direct. Daniel, your presence would mean a great deal, both to the foundation and to me personally. This year's focus is supporting STEM education in underserved communities, because I believe would resonate with you. I understand if this invitation brings up complicated feelings. Whatever you decide, please know that the door is always open. Warmly, Jennifer, my first instinct was to decline. The thought of walking into a Blackwood event seemed unnecessarily painful. Yet something about Jennifer's sincere outreach gave me Pause. I discussed it with Jason over dinner that evening. It's a power move, he observed, but not necessarily a negative one. The Blackwoods are acknowledging your new position. 2 years ago, they excluded you. Now they want your presence to elevate their event. That doesn't make it appealing, I pointed out. Jason smiled. Consider the symbolism, Daniel. You walking into that gala not as Sophia's husband, not as someone seeking approval, but as the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. After considerable thought, I decided to accept, not from desire for vindication, but because hiding from the past served no purpose. I had built a new life, a new identity. I could face the Blackwoods without being defined by my history with them. The night of the gala arrived, and I found myself standing outside the Grand Hotel where it was being held, momentarily hesitant. Through the doors lay a world I had once desperately wanted to belong to, then been forcibly ejected from, and now was being invited back into. I adjusted my custom tuxedo, a far cry from the rented suit I'd worn to Jennifer's wedding, and walked in. Jennifer spotted me immediately, breaking away from a conversation to greet me. "Daniel, you came." Her smile seemed genuine, her handshake warm. "Thank you for supporting the foundation. The cause is important," I said simply. "Your father isn't here." I had prepared myself for an encounter with Edward, but didn't see him in the crowd. Jennifer's expression sobered. "No, his health hasn't improved. He rarely leaves home these days." I nodded, unsure what response was appropriate. "I'm sorry to hear that." She studied me for a moment. "You actually mean that, don't you?" "I do," I admitted. Holding grudges requires too much energy. Then across the room I saw her, Sophia. She was speaking with an older couple, smiling that practiced social smile I remembered so well. Her hair was shorter now, her designer gown impeccable as always. She hadn't seen me yet. As if sensing my gaze, Sophia looked up. Our eyes met across the crowded room. Her smile froze, then slowly faded into an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also something more complex. I gave her a small, civil nod, then deliberately turned back to my conversation partner. Whatever happened next would be her choice, not mine. 10 minutes later, I felt a presence at my shoulder. "Daniel." I turned to find Sophia standing there, composed but with tension evident in her posture. "Sophia," I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. "You look well, as do you." An awkward pause. "I didn't expect to see you here. Jennifer invited me. The Foundation's focus on STEM education aligns with Neural Sync's values." She nodded, seemingly at a loss for words now that the initial greeting was past. The confident woman who had once publicly declared me a failure appeared uncertain, almost fragile. "I know it's far too late," she began, her voice barely audible, above the gala's ambient noise, "but I am truly sorry, Daniel, for all of it. I am truly sorry, Daniel, for all of it." Sophia's words hung between us, sincere but inadequate given everything that had transpired. How do you respond to an apology? For public humiliation? For choosing family expectations over loyalty? "I appreciate that," I said, my tone measured. "But I didn't come here tonight for closure, Sophia. That chapter of my life closed long ago." She flinched slightly. "Of course. I just thought that we should acknowledge the past and move forward." "Civilly," I finished. "I agree. We're bound to encounter each other in these circles now." A shadow crossed her face at the implicit reminder of how thoroughly circumstances had changed. How I was now firmly established in the social world her family had once tried to exclude me from. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "there's something you should know about my father. Jennifer mentioned his health has declined." Sophia nodded, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "It's more than that. He had a serious stroke 3 months ago. The public story is that he's stepping back to focus on personal interests, but the reality is, the doctors say he may never fully recover. Despite everything Edward had done to destroy me and Neural Sync, I felt no satisfaction in his suffering. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. Her eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by my genuine sympathy. "He's been asking to see you." This caught me completely off guard. "Me? Why?" "I don't know exactly. He's different since the stroke. More reflective, perhaps. Would you consider visiting him? Just once?" The request was so unexpected that I didn't immediately respond. Visit Edward Blackwood? The man who had tried to bankrupt me, steal my technology, and blacklist me, but these weren't normal circumstances. Edward was ill, possibly dying, and there was something compelling about the idea of facing him one last time, not from a position of weakness, but as equals. "I'll think about it," I said eventually. "That's all I can promise." 3 days later, after discussing it with Jason, I made the decision. I would meet with Edward Blackwood one last time, not for his sake, but for my own. To truly close this chapter, I needed to face the man who had once held such power over my life. The Blackwood estate was exactly as I remembered it, imposing, perfectly maintained, a monument to old money and established power. A nurse met me at the door, leading me through the grand foyer to Edward's private study, now transformed into a sick room. Edward Blackwood sat in a wheelchair beside a hospital bed, gazing out at the grounds. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His right side appeared slightly slumped, evidence of the stroke. When he turned at the sound of our entrance, I saw that his face showed the asymmetry typical of stroke survivors. "Daniel," he said, his speech slightly slurred, but intelligible. "You came." I sat, maintaining eye contact. "Yes." "Didn't think you would." A ghost of his old smirk crossed his face. "Wouldn't have, in your place." "Maybe that's the difference between us." He nodded slowly, conceding the point. "Always underestimated you. My mistake." The admission was startling, coming from Edward Blackwood, a man who, in my experience, had never acknowledged error or weakness. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Edward's left hand, his functional one, tapped restlessly on the armrest of his wheelchair. "Unfinished business. Wanted to see you face to face. We've been face to face before. It didn't go well." A wheezing sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. "No, it didn't." He looked out the window again, gathering his thoughts. When he turned back, his expression had changed, some of the old intensity returning to his gaze. "I was wrong about you," he said, each word deliberate. "Wrong about what you could build. Wrong to try to destroy it." The admission hung in the air between us, too significant to immediately respond to. "Why did you?" I asked finally. "Try to destroy Neural Sync? Was it just because of Sophia? Because I wouldn't go away quietly?" He shook his head slightly. "Partly that. Partly saw the potential. Wanted it for Blackwood Industries. Mistake to steal rather than partner." "It wouldn't have worked anyway," I said. "The technology advanced too quickly after you took the early code. You were always going to be behind." He nodded. "Smart move. Always stay ahead." He gestured toward me. "Built something real, something important." A silence fell between us, not comfortable, but no longer charged with hostility. Edward seemed to be struggling with something, his expression shifting. "My daughter," he said finally. "Sophia, she followed my lead, my values, my mistake." His speech was becoming more labored. "Not hers, mine." "Sophia made her own choices," I said, neither absolving nor condemning her. "Just as I made mine." Edward studied me, then nodded once. "Fair." He gestured toward a folder on the side table. "For you. Read it later." I took the folder, curious but unwilling to examine its contents in front of him. "Is there anything else?" I asked, sensing the meeting was reaching its natural conclusion. Edward's expression turned reflective, almost philosophical, an aspect of him I had never seen before. Built my life, acquiring things. Power. Control. He glanced around the opulent study, now serving as a sick room. None of it matters now. Remember that, when you're at the top. It was a surprisingly vulnerable moment from a man who had once seemed invincible. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion for him, not because he deserved it, but because his current state revealed the fundamental human fragility that wealth and power can temporarily disguise, but never eliminate. "I should go," I said, standing. "Thank you for seeing me." He raised his good hand slightly. "No, thank you for coming, for building something better than I did." In the privacy of my car, I opened the folder Edward had given me. Inside was a legal document with a brief note in his now shaky handwriting. The least I can do. The document was a formal withdrawal of Blackwood Technologies' lawsuit against Neural Sync, with full acknowledgement that their claims had been without merit. It was already signed. It was, in its way, the most complete vindication possible, yet somehow it felt almost unnecessary. I had already won the battle that mattered most, not in court or in business, but in refusing to be defined by his rejection or destroyed by his attacks. As my driver pulled away from the Blackwood estate, I didn't look back. There was nothing there I needed anymore. 1 year after our IPO, Neural Sync had transformed from promising startup to established industry leader. Our quantum processing technology was revolutionizing fields from healthcare to aerospace. Our stock had stabilized at 3 times its initial offering price, and our team had grown to over 200 brilliant individuals. I no longer thought of myself in relation to the Blackwoods or my failed marriage. I was simply Daniel Reeves, CEO of Neural Sync, a man building something that mattered. Edward Blackwood passed away 6 months after our meeting, his health having steadily declined. I sent flowers to the funeral but did not attend. Sophia sent a brief, formal thank you note, and that was the extent of our communication. Then came the invitation that would lead to the most perfect moment of poetic justice I could never have orchestrated myself. Gabriel Martinez, founder of Helios Aerospace and one of our most important partners, was hosting an exclusive retreat for tech industry leaders on his private island in the Caribbean. The invitation list was limited to 20 CEOs whose companies were doing groundbreaking work. "You have to go," Alan insisted when I hesitated, citing our busy development schedule. "The connections you'll make there could open doors for Neural Sync that would otherwise take years." He was right. The opportunity to spend 4 days with the most innovative minds in technology was too valuable to pass up. I agreed to attend, arranging for our executive team to handle operations in my absence. 2 weeks later, I boarded the Neural Sync corporate jet, a Gulfstream G650 that had been a strategic acquisition following our IPO, necessary for our increasingly global operations. But also, I had to admit, a particularly satisfying symbol of how far I had come. As the jet prepared for takeoff, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason Blackwood. "Have a good trip. By the way, did you know the Blackwood family always stays at Martinez's resort this time of year? Annual tradition for decades. Interesting coincidence." I stared at the message, wondering if it truly was coincidence or if Martinez had deliberately scheduled his tech retreat to coincide with the Blackwoods' vacation. The possibility of encountering Sophia was unexpected, but not particularly concerning. The flight was smooth. As we began our descent toward the private airstrip on Martinez's island, I looked out the window at the stunning landscape below. Crystal blue waters, pristine beaches, and lush tropical forest. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Reeves, we've been instructed to taxi to the main terminal after landing. Mr. Martinez has arranged transportation to the compound from there." As our jet taxied toward the designated area, I noticed a group of people watching from the small terminal building's observation deck. Initially, I paid them little attention. Then, as we drew closer, I recognized them. Sophia, standing with her brother Carter and several other Blackwood family members. They were clearly waiting for their own flight, but had paused to watch the arriving aircraft. I considered remaining on the plane until they had gone, avoiding the potential awkwardness of an encounter. Then I decided against it. I had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. The jet came to a stop. As the cabin door opened and the steps extended, I straightened my jacket and walked confidently toward the exit. The Caribbean sunlight was brilliant. As I emerged from the aircraft, when my vision adjusted, I saw that the Blackwood group had moved closer, now standing near the bottom of the steps. Sophia's expression was complex. Surprise, perhaps a hint of embarrassment, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Carter looked openly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I descended the steps, nodding politely as I reached the tarmac. "Sophia, Carter, what a surprise!" "Daniel," Sophia managed, her composure slightly shaken. We're here for our annual family vacation." "Of course. I'm attending Gabriel Martinez's technology retreat." I gestured toward the sleek Gulfstream behind me. "Corporate transportation makes these trips more efficient." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The man Sophia had publicly declared broke at her sister's wedding was now standing on a Caribbean tarmac, having arrived in a private jet worth approximately $65 million. Carter cleared his throat. "Congratulations on Neural Sync's success. Very impressive." "Thank you," I said, genuinely appreciating the acknowledgement from someone who had once viewed me with thinly veiled disdain. An awkward silence followed, broken by the arrival of my driver. "Mr. Reeves, I'm here to take you to Mr. Martinez's compound." "Thank you." I turned back to the Blackwoods. "Enjoy your vacation." As I walked toward the waiting vehicle, I heard Sophia call my name. I paused, turning back. "I'm glad," she said simply, "that everything worked out for you." I nodded once. Everything worked out exactly as it should have. Then I continued to the SUV, not looking back. As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of the Blackwood group in the side mirror, Sophia still watching, the others already turning away. The contrast between this moment and that night at Jennifer's wedding couldn't have been more stark. Then I had walked away humiliated, rejected, declared a failure. Now I was departing on my own terms, successful beyond what anyone, including myself, had imagined possible. But the true triumph wasn't the private jet, or the exclusive retreat invitation, or even the look on Sophia's face. It was the realization that none of it mattered to me the way it once would have. I hadn't built Neural Sync to prove something to the Blackwoods. I had built it because I believed in the technology, in the team, in the vision of what quantum computing could accomplish. My motivation had transformed from external validation to internal purpose. As the SUV wound its way through the lush tropical landscape toward Martinez's compound, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The humiliation at Jennifer's wedding had been painful, yes, but necessary. It had stripped away illusions and set me on a more authentic path. The Martinez retreat exceeded all expectations. For 4 days, I engaged in deep discussions with some of the most innovative minds in technology. We debated ethical applications of AI, explored quantum computing's role in climate science, and formed connections that would lead to collaborations I could never have anticipated. On the final evening, Martinez raised a toast to technology that matters, to building things that will outlast us, that will make this world better long after we're gone. The words resonated deeply. Wasn't that the true measure of success? Not stock prices or personal wealth or vindication. against those who doubted you, but creating something of lasting value. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.